Mr. President, I will, or Mr. Chair, but I beg your pardon, Monsieur le Président, I will not apologize because the journalism is among the finest in the world. Our journalists operate in an independent fashion, independent of management, independent of the board of directors, and independent of government and political influence. They are guided by the journalistic standards and practices, and I invite any member and any Canadian to refer to these practices on our website. They are transparent and they are public.
I totally disagree with Catherine Tate's assessment that they are independent. And here's what I'm going to do and showcase to everybody why I believe this is not the case. This is the easiest thing any Canadian can do, and I encourage Canadians to do this. Here in Canada, for those that aren't from Canada, we had the largest protest ever in our history, the Freedom Convoy in 2022. Jeez. The coverage by the media of the Freedom Convoy here in Canada, it's so incredible to believe that they were so one-sided. The topic was so divisive for Canadians. There are so many Canadians that were for them. There are many that were against them. It was very divided. It divided Canadians. The truckers, to many Canadians, represented the frustration that Canadians were having with the vaccine mandates and the COVID lockdowns. We had no idea if the government was going to lift any of those restrictions. And to show you that it's divisive, let me just show you this CTV poll. However, 44% of those polled agreed with the statement, "I am vaccinated against COVID, but I do sympathize with the concerns and frustrations voiced by the people involved in the trucker protest." Catherine Tate said that the CBC is free of government influence. So if you literally just Google Freedom Convoy on the CBC's website, you're going to find our negative article after negative article. Protesters weren't attracted to the convoy by protest. Protesters, Freedom Convoy made it near impossible to live. Officer describes hostile crowd in Litch Barber trial. Trial begins for Crown to call Ottawa residents in convoy trial. Police directed convoy protesters downtown. Officer tells trial. Resident tells trial he felt threatened by convoy participants. Protesters urinated, defecated on church property. Pat King to face jury in Ottawa after venue changed tonight. Oh, sorry, that's not it. Freedom Convoy organizers to face trial. Crypto donations for Freedom Convoy evading seizure by authorities. Who stood up for the Freedom Convoy? Kind of used in like a pejorative term. Residents abandoned to a violent occupation during Freedom Convoy. They were overwhelmed. Mendocino on police during self-described Freedom Convoy. Everything when it comes to the Freedom Convoy is exceptionally negative. Exceptionally negative. There's not one article here that's at least attempts to be balanced and free of government influence, in my opinion. So let's find out more about the journalistic standards and practices by the CBC. When you go down to the CBC's journalistic standards and practices, I was trying to do this earlier today and I couldn't find anything. What you'll find is it doesn't talk about taking a stance or being biased. Okay, so the Freedom Convoy, and I'm going to stick to that example, was a civil disturbance. The information we provide helps audience understand a fluid and chaotic situation so that it can assess the impact and potential danger. This doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me anything about the CBC being free of government influence, especially when it comes to riots and demonstrations, which in fact is perhaps one of the most important areas where you need to be free of government influence, right? You have to be free of that stuff because otherwise the riots and demonstrations will be undermined by your biased coverage. Now, can you imagine someone takes time out their day, they're really upset with the government stance on whatever. There's nothing in the CBC's journalistic standards and practices that openly says that their goal is to try to understand the protest. There's nothing here that says that. In fact, it says if reporters on one side of a confrontation cannot provide an overview, we ensure the audience receives the broader context in the course of our coverage. That's not true. That is not true at all. But hang on. Let me just read that again. If reporters on one side of a confrontation cannot provide an overview, that's interesting. Why would they not be able to provide an overview? We ensure the audience receives a broader context in the course of our coverage. That last part isn't true. They do not ensure the audience receives a broader context in the course of coverage. In fact, they say that they only will do that if reporters on one side of a confrontation cannot provide an overview. This is a very weird sentence. If reporters on one side of a confrontation cannot provide an overview, we ensure the audience receives a broader context. No, you don't. There's no evidence that you do. I just showed the Freedom Convoy was reported by reporters who took one side of the entire movement. There's no evidence at all on the CBC's website that they provided a broader context in the course of their coverage. Our journalistic independence, sorry, I just bit my lip. Our journalistic independence and credibility, this stuff gets me so passionate. Our journalistic independence and credibility is paramount, so our reporting should avoid inflaming or aiding in any way the various sides in a confrontation. Haha. The way they phrase this is very, very weird. I'm just going to say it. It's weird. Like, look at that sentence. It says, our journalistic independence and credibility is paramount. So our reporting should avoid inflaming or aiding in any way the various sides in a confrontation. Okay, that's interesting. Our reporting should, not must, it should avoid inflaming or aiding in any way the various sides in a confrontation. Don't get it twisted at all. These media execs go through their journalistic standards and practices with a fine-tooth comb, looking specifically at the verbs, the adjectives, the nouns that they use throughout their pieces that they put forward. This sentence right here can completely change the tone if this one word should was redone, was replaced with must. Our reporting must avoid inflaming or aiding in any way the various sides in a confrontation. Not should, it must. It absolutely must avoid inflaming. That, to me, is what a public broadcaster must do. It should avoid inflaming. It must avoid inflaming and aiding in any way the various sides in a confrontation. This is absolute madness. We consider the public interest before offering live. This includes taking into account the possibility of showing scenes of extreme violence. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so now, guys, I'm getting all riled up, and I haven't even read the other sections. Individuals or small groups sometimes act in ways that cause disruptions and are potentially dangerous. Let's see what we got here. Before providing hunger strikes, this is interesting. We take into account that the presence of a camera or microphone can alter the behavior of participants. If you're just joining me, sorry everybody, if you're just joining me, I am going through the journalistic standards of the... I'm going through the journalistic standards and practices of the CBC. This is what I'm doing on a Thursday night at 9 o'clock and calling out Catherine Tate. Catherine Tate, CEO of the CBC. I'm calling you out. You got... This is hilarious. Oh, what am I doing? Okay. If CBC staff have exclusive access to a sit-in or demonstration, a decision should be referred to by the managing editor. Okay, I don't... All of this is just such horseshit. It's not to be believed. So going back to what Catherine Tate said, Catherine Tate is the CEO of the CBC, who openly said that their government, I'm so used to saying that about the CBC. Catherine Tate said that the CBC is free of government interference, and if anybody has questions, to consult the journalistic standards and practices that are on their website. I have gone through the section on civil disturbances in relation to the Freedom Convoy, because if you go on the CBC's website, there's not one single article, maybe there's one, there's not two articles of their dozens of articles they've put forward on the Freedom Convoy that attempts to understand why Canadians decided to be part of that protest. Not one, maybe one, not two, okay? There's not two articles about trying to understand why Canadians went down and protested in February in the dead of winter to protest the government. She said, we're free of government interference and we're independent and da-da-da-da. The government, the Liberal government under Trudeau, supported by Jagmeet Singh, sought to discredit those protesters from day one. Trudeau openly said that they were this fringe minority of people. They blocked all of Ottawa. They weren't being heard. If you go through the CBC's journalistic standards and practices on civil disturbances, it uses such wishy-washy language that it's hard to actually know what exactly is meant. For example, this right here is the most ridiculous sentence. And maybe I write a letter to Catherine Tate and let Catherine know I believe it's a ridiculous sentence. Our reporting should avoid inflaming or aiding in any way the various sides in a confrontation. No, your reporting must, M-U-S-T, must avoid inflaming or aiding in any way the various sides in a confrontation. Not should. There's no should here. Must. Absolute must. I can't believe that Catherine Tate could say that this is free of government influence and independent. This is such a miss, and it makes me so, not sick, but it just makes me so upset at the way in which these government entities say they're independent, and they're not. You know, they are not. You know, if you go to politics, it's election coverage, online surveys, etc. No. I am more concerned about the framing of your issues, the framing of your news articles, the framing of your videos, the political bias that's built in to your hiring practices and who you hire. I can't think, and this is me ranting now and not reporting, but I can't think of a CBC journalist who is not only middle of the road, I would say who isn't. I can't think of a CBC journalist who's right-leaning, period. Let's just call it what it is. If you want to be free of government influence, then you'd have journalists and people in your newsroom of varying ideas and backgrounds, diversity of perspective. When I tune into the CBC, I know what I'm getting. I know it's a packaged product that's not going to be nearly as critical of the government as it should be. And the Freedom Convoy is just one of many, many examples. There's just so many examples. The amount of criticism towards Trudeau. You know how many protests there have been against Trudeau, and consistently either it's not covered, or people who, or if it is covered, it's not discussed more broadly.